This new series is titled Structural Equality, and it comes out of a residency I did in the US at Teton Art Lab, which is at the base of Teton and Yellowstone National Parks. So you will see in these paintings, like the one behind me, there's a lot of source imagery from this region, and it intersects with imagery that I've taken from parts of Asia and Australia from earlier residencies. And in this way continues my investigation into how we can conceive of place in ways that are beyond nationalistic borderlines. I was due to arrive in America very shortly after Donald Trump got elected president, so it was amidst the hysteria of walls and keeping people out. Actually, just a few weeks before I was meant to arrive, they imposed the 7-country ban, which is where anyone associated with these 7 blacklisted Muslim countries were no longer welcome. And this change happened overnight, so people who were in transition were asked to get off planes. When things were escalating this quickly, I was nervous, even though I'm Australian, just because I happen to be born in a Muslim country, being Malaysia. I was nervous that they just wouldn't even let me into the country. Thankfully they did, and my residency was in Jackson, which is a very progressive small town, which is in a anti-Trump electorate, but completely flanked on all sides by Trump supporters. So in this context, I was able to witness firsthand this really polar divisiveness between white nationalism and what I think we've witnessed this real groundswell of proponents advocating for greater diversity. Since coming back to Australia, I was really influenced in thinking of how I was going to conceive of this new series, really influenced by this fantastic book by an American author called Crystal Fleming. It's titled How to Be Less Stupid About Race. And I think it should be part of the school curriculum here. I think everyone should read it. I think the biggest takeaway from the book is that we often associate race-related issues with being at an individual level. So, so-and-so is so racist. But really, it comes down to structural inequalities, meaning that disparities between societal groups are really rooted in systemic issues at an institutional level. So for this series, I've been thinking a lot about structures, and I use that word in the broader sense. So the paintings bring together physical built structures and merges them with naturally forming structures from the natural environment, to think about how they reflect and inform the economic and social structures that we live in. And this is really what separates this series from previous series. In the past, you'll have seen I tend to use more temporary shelter structures, and I've used this as a way of talking about sanctuary and transition. Whereas for this series, the focus has been more on permanent built structures as a way of speaking about power and authority. And how do these built structures that then permeate the natural environment and consequently affect the way that we think about the world that we live in? So for example, in one of the paintings called Tears, you'll see people working on a construction site. And as you'll often observe, these people are people of colour, and they are labouring on a large-scale real estate development that most likely will be for the benefit of mostly white people. And I have merged the building on the side with the side of a waterfall. And I've done this to match the logic of the tiers of the scaffolding of the construction site with the tiers of the waterfall. So I'm thinking here about the economic structure of tiers, where there's meant to be this flow-down effect where income from the wealthiest part of society is supposed to trickle down to all other parts of society. And I guess I've been thinking about the failures of this system and really why is it structured in this way in the first place? Why is so much of the wealth in the hands of so few, and so many of us are then expected to just wait for things to trickle down to us. So this strategy of assembling into the one canvas plane man-made and natural structures that carry the same logic, you'll see this repeated throughout the exhibition. Another example is in another run, where I've used the structure of ladders for what they connote about climbing the corporate ladder or trying to get to different social standing, and how this then reflects in the natural landscape in the perspective of looking down from above. In peaks, I've matched the peak of the built structure with the peaks of the mountainsides. And I'm thinking here about the societal obsession about reaching the peak, reaching the top, being the best, and who even has the opportunity to try to do that, and who gets left behind in the process. So the show is about unpacking the way things are, but also how they could be better. And that's why it's called structural equality. I think there's this running motif in the paintings of this imperfect reflection, or really more accurately, a more perfect reflection, in that it's a way of me imagining how things could be more idyllic. So ultimately, amidst this mismatch of competing cultural references, I think the paintings compositionally find this balance, this sense of harmony, and I think that's something that we can aspire to. So there's a little bit about the background of the development of this series and what was going on in the world at the time that these paintings were being made. So I realised that a lot of these references are quite subtle, and they often are in the smaller details of the paintings. So I'm hoping that the longer you look at them and the closer you look, the more you might see.